Well, how you doing? Welcome to Community Crossfire, another point of view. I'm your host, Norman Oliver. Have a very interesting show this evening. Braden O'Neill, the Chief Public Defender for the state of Delaware. We're going to engage in a really important conversation, especially when it comes to plea bargains. What does the Public Defender's Office do? What's their role, lawyers compared to public defenders? We're going to talk about access and all that kind of stuff. But before I go to my guest, I just want to echo the sentiments that I'm sure a lot of folks were saying today. My condolences out to the Williams family. Judge Leonard Williams was a friend of mine and my family's, and I just wanted to tell him how much I appreciated him. As a matter of fact, Judge Williams read me in when I was a city councilman. So he's going to be greatly missed. As a matter of fact, I think Monte and those guys who did an excellent job, and they were throwing this event for the lawyers. I know it was Judge Sleet was there, Judge Tolliver. I think Stacey Mobley was getting an award, and I saw Judge Williams at this event again sometime last year, a couple months ago, and I was telling him then, I said, "Wow, you're such an inspiration to me." I said, "Man, you're such a hero. You're like a monument in our community. You know, every time you walk in a room like this, people should really, say Judge Williams is here because you are that big." And he kind of smiled and just played it off. But that is the reason why. That is the single reason why. Last month I had the whole event on Black History Month, and then we had Herman and Kenyon and Richard Smith and those guys who joined us when we were talking about legends and people in our community, because you just never know when these guys are going to perish. Now, Lenny Williams is passed on, and some of the information that he's taken with him, we would never be able to get. People in our community, we would never be able to get that information again. I mean, we got guys like Jim Gilliam Sr. He's getting older now, 90, 92 years old. I get an opportunity to go talk to him. These are the folks we have to start talking to, because these are the kind of people in our community who have been laymen. And I just feel so bad for the Williams family. I just want to, again, send out my condolences. Braden, I remember when I was doing those shows for Black History Month, and out of 100 people, about 98 people saying, "No, wow, that show with Herman and Kenyon and Cy Wolford and all those guys, it was so inspirational." But you always get like two people who just don't get it, and that's sad in itself. That's sad in itself. But to the Williams family, I just want to, Lenny Williams, and again, this guy served with the great Lewis Redden. So can you imagine how much knowledge he had? Lenny Williams was probably one of the first 20, he was probably in the 20 like that, who graduated from University of Delaware, blacks. One of the first 20 or top 10, whatever. One of the first 4 or 5 black players who played on University of Delaware's football team. He was a center. I think it was he and Sidney Clark or someone else were maybe one of the first 1 or 2 black judges in the state of Delaware. And you could just rifle off things after things after things. So we have to recognize those folks, and I'm just happy that I was able to had the opportunity to speak to him a lot of times. He would tell me stories about my mother, because he knew my mother, and when he swore me in, he told me, and he said, "Norm, you got emotional." He said, "Man, your mother would have been proud of you," and that just made me feel so good. On another subject, I forgot to mention last week when Herman was on here. Congratulations to Herman Holloway Jr. for being appointed to the Housing Authority Board of Directors. I guess the Housing Authority should strap their boots up, because Herman's coming. Oh my goodness! Woo. Herman, why didn't you mention that when he was on the show? Oh, that is funny. Also, happy birthday to Councilwoman Hanifa Shabazz. Okay, I think I covered everything. Oh yeah, Ben Jealous, NAACP. Richard Smith just told me he's going to be here this Tuesday, I think from 9 to 11. He's going to go to Young Conway I think their office is on King Street.
It's the old courthouse.
It's the old courthouse, right? That's on 9th and King, 10th and King?
Yes.
Ben Jealous, the president of
Between 10th
NAACP.
and 11th,
Yep,
yeah.
10th and 11th. He's going to be there from 9 to 9:45 or so. Then they're going to go to the mayor's office. So if you want to meet Ben Jealous, the president of NAACP, call Richard Smith and Mousy, and I'm sure he could talk to you about it. They're going to be talking about pardons and rights to vote and all that kind of good stuff. It's a good segue to us. How you doing? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
How you doing?
Good.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a good topic. Public Defender's Office. You are the chief.
I'm the public defender for the state of Delaware.
For the whole state.
Yes.
Besides, I gotta get this in first. Wayne Jefferson, my friend Wayne Jefferson. I know Wayne's watching. Does Wayne call you boss?
He calls me Brendan. From all the people who work in the office to call me Brendan, and Wayne has done a great job for us. Wayne,
so he doesn't just get coffee and donuts for you and say,
no.
boss, here's your coffee.
Nobody gets coffee from me. I get my own coffee. Wayne has done a great job for us. He's an intake investigator. So he works over in our courthouse office, and what happens is if someone is coming in to seek services to be represented by the public defender, we do an intake process, and Wayne is a person who interviews people who are seeking representation. So he's the first person that someone seeking public defender services meets. So in some ways, he's the face of our office for many of the clients walking in seeking services.
And Brandon, that's a good segue. So the public defender's office, you guys represent people from like 9 to 90? Is there a certain age?
There's no age limit. There are a couple of eligibility criteria. There are essentially two. One is that you have to be charged with a crime that could potentially end up in a sentence where you would go to jail. Just the possibility of jail is the first determining factor. Is there a possibility that if you're convicted of the crime you're charged with, could you possibly, in a legal sense, go to jail? And in Delaware, there are many, many crimes that could put you in jail, rarely, if ever, do, but they entitle you to be represented by a public defender's office. Mm-hmm. So that's the first criterion. The second criterion is whether or not you are eligible financially. In other words, do you qualify as indigent? Mm-hmm. And our rule of thumb, and it's a generalization, basically if you have an income of $500 a week or less, then you're going to qualify for services from the public defender's office.
Mm-hmm. How many people do you think use the public defenders, and public defender pretty much like a lawyer? How many people?
No. Public defenders are lawyers. They're not pretty much like lawyers. We are lawyers. We're fully qualified. We're all through the bar, and the reality is, we're the best criminal law firm in the state of Delaware.
And I'm glad you clarified that, because that is the perception, right?
You know, I think it has been. I also think, Norm, in the last several years, we've been able to change that perception, and we've done that by providing services that people understand to be first rate. Mm-hmm. We have made an effort to make our office very service-oriented. It's client first, and we know that the only reason we're in existence is to serve our clientele. So we've made it a goal to become the best criminal defense law firm in the state, and it's obviously our opinion, but we think we've done that.
Right. Let me just break it down rather. Not, I don't want to look at the state because that's so global. Let's say Newcastle County. How many clients do you think you guys have, the caseload, the average?
Well, I can tell you, in our Superior Court practice, our lawyers close about 200 files, felony files, in a calendar or a fiscal year. So in a 12-month period, our lawyers will close about 200 files, and they'll have about 75 or 80 open at any given time on average. Our Court of Common Pleas lawyers will close much more than that. They'll close, and they're misdemeanor cases, and they're not as complex. They'll close about 850 files over a recommended maximum of about 400 by the American Bar Association. And our family court lawyers will close about 450 files per year. So we have busy caseloads, and we have busy lawyers, and we have a lot of cases.
Is that just Newcastle County?
No, those are statewide figures. I don't have them, and they're about average.
No, that's okay. Yeah. So I mean, just sitting here calculating, because that's about 1,600 cases.
Well,
if you look at Court of Common Pleas, Superior Court, and
except you only are assigned to one court. So the way we break it down, the only courts that the Superior Court lawyers work in are Superior Court.
I understand that.
All right, And our Court of Common Pleas lawyers work in the Court of Common Pleas, and likewise our family
Yeah, I
court
understand
lawyers.
that. Understand. I'm just saying the totality.
Oh, you know, we do a lot of numbers crunching for budgetary purpose and management purposes, and we average about 47,000 cases a year statewide. Over the last 3 years, it's been pretty steady, a very slight increase, but about 47,000 cases, which include all misdemeanors, felony preliminary hearings, violations of probation, capious returns, and then Superior Court cases. So we do a big volume.
I mean, the reason why I was asking, it appears to me that you would always be going to the state, or at least to the governor, looking for more lawyers.
Well,
I mean, like how many lawyers do you have on your?
we have 75, including myself.
Okay, like how many do you just assign? Let's say to Superior Court.
Well, in Newcastle County, there are 16 assigned to Superior Court.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying. Like 16 handling like 400 cases.
Well, no, on average, they close 200 cases each.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
I mean, you feel me?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
that's
a lot.
I mean, that's what I'm trying to get
But
to.
I also know I've had that job, and I've also been a defense lawyer in private practice. Because of the additional resources we have, the other things we have in our office, our support staff, our team of field investigators, our team of psychoforensic evaluators, and the resources we have to get outside services if needed, I can tell you that if our lawyers are enthusiastic about our work, our Superior Court lawyers have enough time to do the cases they're presently assigned. We can't do many more.
That's my
Now,
point.
we're about at our capacity per lawyer. But I've done the job, and I've also been a lawyer in private practice doing criminal defense work. We have enough support that the lawyers can do the number of cases they're presently handling. We can't go much higher, but what we have now we can do, and we can do well.
So, wow, this is a good segue. Thank you, because this is a little different conversation than we had. So, like, if, say for instance, you're the lawyer, and you're dealing with a murder case,
Right.
right? And you have someone else on your docket who has some drug trafficking and all that.
Right.
Can they honestly deal with both, or all three, or all five, or all 10 at the same time?
It's a very good
Is
question.
that a good question?
A very good question, and there's no easy answer. And part of what we do, we don't assign murder cases to to just any of our lawyers. You have to be a certain level of experience.
I agree.
And in all capital cases, there are 2 lawyers assigned, and we assemble a defense team. In a capital murder case, there are 2 lawyers. There's a fact investigator, there's a psychoforensic evaluator, there's a mitigation specialist, and we assign a forensic specialist to consult on the case. So for every capital murder case, we assemble a group of 5 or 6 people that do that case. And the shelf life on all murder cases, there's a directive from the Superior Court that tries to get the cases to trial within 1 year from the date of indictment, which is a little too short for us to prepare, so we end up extending that deadline most of the time.
Do you have to get outside? I mean, do you have to sometimes get lawyers outside of your jurisdiction or outside of your office? You understand my point?
Yes. Here's an example. You and I both get arrested. I go in and I get a public defender. Well, then the public defender's office cannot represent you. Okay. You need a separate lawyer. And we have a program where we have 25 lawyers statewide that are under contract, and they're conflict lawyers, and you would, in that circumstance, be appointed a lawyer from the conflict program who's not in the public defender's office. So it's a separate group of lawyers that contract with the state to provide services for people who cannot afford to hire their own lawyers.
Is it also true, right? And I like talking.
That's a lawyer question, you know.
I know.
Isn't it true that? It's also true, isn't it?
Well, I do have some legal background here. I'm like a legal guy myself. Well, I guess one of the knocks on your office, right, would be the public defender not getting back in touch with the person.
Well, that's fair, and that's a legit.
And that's why I was asking you about the volume.
Right. It's a legitimate question, and if that's happening, it's a fair complaint by our lawyer, and I tell you what, by our client, and we have a policy now that phone calls are to be returned within 24 hours. And, you know, we're not in 100% compliance,
right?
But we're getting there, and there is a conscious effort, and we have a system in place now where we require our lawyers to put in our database every contact they have with a client. And that's either a phone call, a visit in the office, a visit out of the jail, or we can video conference with people who are in custody. And all those have to be recorded. And I'll have to tell you, Norm, it was a tough deal getting our lawyers to do that. But once they learned that the documentation of what they're doing, it enables me to cover their backs. Because, let's say you have a nephew who's in jail, and you call me up and say, nobody's been out to see him. My nephew's out there, and he's not getting represented. He's got court coming up. What's going on? Well, while you're on the phone talking to me, I can pull up your nephew's case, see who the lawyer is, and I can tell whether the lawyer's either been out there or written him letters or had phone conversations with him, because it's all in the database. So once our lawyers learned that the database was there for me to back them up in the face of complaints, the compliance rate has been much, much better, because they know it's to their advantage. Because we claim we've been doing the work, but now we've got the lawyers documenting the work that they've been doing. And so this has really been a helpful thing in terms of management. And on the other hand, if you call up, I look and the lawyer hasn't been doing what he's supposed to be doing, I give him a call and say, hey, get on the job, or what are you doing here?
Good.
So it's been a big help.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you just tuned in, my guest this evening is Braden O'Neill. He's the Chief Public Defender's Office for the state of Delaware, who handles a lot of cases. A lot of the folks who are watching here, so maybe you're going to have some good questions. Let's talk about plea bargains, and I think this is a good point also. When you say you're dealing with some of the poorest folks,
right?
So, do most of the times you find that your lawyers are saying, look, it's easier to take a plea rather than go for all-out trial just because of cause? Or is it...
Never for that reason.
Okay.
Never for that reason. And the reality is, plea bargain drives the system. 98% of the cases are resolved by way of a plea bargain.
Okay.
A huge volume. Without plea bargaining, the system would grind to a halt. On the other hand, every one of our lawyers says to every one of our clients, nobody can make you take a plea. That's entirely your decision. That is up to you. Now, the lawyer can give them pretty pointed advice about what he thinks or what she thinks the client's chances are for succeeding if you go to trial. But the lawyer cannot make the person take a plea, whether it's a public defender, a private lawyer. Neither private defense counsel nor a public defender can make a person take a plea. It's up to the person. And this is an adversarial process. The state is required to prove a client's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt at a trial, and the client has the right to make the state do that. On the other hand, sometimes it's clear from the evidence that the client has little chance for success at a trial. When that happens, it is oftentimes the client's best interest to make a plea bargain. And you know what pleas are usually taken? Get out of jail pleas. Person's sitting in jail, he's been in jail for a period of time, the lawyer comes down and says, I got a deal for you. The deal is, if you enter a plea to this, you're going to walk out the door.
But is that good or bad for the system?
It's up to the client.
No. I mean, my question is, right? Like I didn't read that total report, but we have guys in there who've done some crazy stuff, right? And we offer them pleas, they come out, then they shoot somebody else, do this. I mean,
a plea that gets a person out of jail is a reflection, in many circumstances, of the state having a weak case. If the state has lousy evidence, they'll make a deal because they want to get something out of the case. And in those circumstances, the defendant certainly has a right to take the case to trial and defend himself and make the case prove it. But the reality is there's risk involved. And one of the risks is the uncertainty of the outcome. You don't know what the outcome is going to be. On a plea bargain, the person has a pretty clear idea what the outcome is going to be, because it's understood that in most circumstances, the judge is going to agree with the sentence that the lawyer and the client and the prosecutor arrive at.
So you said you worked as a lawyer in the public defender's office before?
Yes.
Is there anything, without probably even mentioning names, that stands out, a case that you're like, wow, it just really touched you, or just like?
I defended James Cook, the University of Delaware case.
Oh, wow.
I represented Donald Flagg, the Mrs. Puglisi case.
Wow.
So they were big projects with a lot at stake. And they were very intense projects. And I'll tell you a funny story from the Donald Flagg case. It was covered very intensely by the News Journal. I went to court on a Monday. We had some kind of hearing. When I'm coming out of the courthouse, the photographer takes my picture, and it's on the front page of Tuesday's paper. Tuesday at lunchtime, I go over to the Central Y to play basketball. Usually I'm the last guy picked, chubby white guy, you know, showing up to play pickup basketball. Some guy sees me and said, "Wait a minute, you O'Neill, the lawyer, defending flag?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You're my man today, your first round pick." So that was my 15 minutes of fame.
Well, they never even picked me, man. I'm like the oldest JV basketball player. So how does a person become a lawyer in the public defender's office?
Well, first of all, you have to be a lawyer, and that's 4 years of college, and then 3 years of law school, and then pass the Delaware bar, and then we are salaried employees by the state, and we have on staff 75 lawyers, and people apply for the jobs. We have people,
so 100% of your money's from the state?
Yes.
Okay.
And we have people banging the door down. They're very good jobs. If you're a lawyer who wants to get into court and get responsibility right away and have an interesting, stimulating practice without being locked in a high-rise and living a long gray life and working 90 million hours a week, you can have a very interesting, very stimulating law practice and still have a balanced life. But you're not going to make as much money as some of the lawyers who are working in the private sector.
What do you think about the whole recidivism stuff?
Well, it's a problem that's plaguing our community. And it's there's a big expose in the News Journal a couple of weeks ago, and some of it I agree with it, much of it I don't agree with.
Well, just to be honest, I never agree with him anyway, so I'm on the same page with you. Especially the guy who wrote it, I think but that's a whole other issue.
Right.
Well, go ahead.
So, it's obviously plaguing our community when people who commit a crime get convicted of it or sentenced, they come out and commit another crime. But my concern as the public defender is to make sure that when they're back out in the community, they're still protected by the rights that protect all of us. It's tempting by all of us to say, just lock them up and keep them there. But we can't do that. We can't incarcerate our way out of our problems. People are going to be sentenced. They're going to be re-released into the community. We need to make sure that those people coming out have some skill sets and have some services to give them a real opportunity to succeed when they get out, so they don't revert to crime.
Okay. Alvin, if you can put the number up. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're enjoying this. We're talking to Braden O'Neill, who's the public defender for the state. I'm sure a number of you who are watching, your sons, daughters, nephews, nieces, grandsons, or you have been dealing with the public defender office. Maybe he can answer some of the questions. This is the kind of quality programming we try to bring to you. And also, next couple of weeks, we're going to bring up the stuff about the Port of Wilmington with Kendra Morgan, because that's going to be a hot topic. Okay, so let me see. How you doing? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Norman, it's Julius. How you doing?
I'm good.
Okay, the question I want to ask is that for the plea bargain, they have so many plea bargains. How many people do they keep a record of people being innocent who had the plea bargain? And number two, what is their budget case by case? Because they're getting paid by the state. The state is trying to downsize. And does that affect their office?
Julian, good question. I have to say, it's a little tough to answer, but I can tell you this. We don't get paid by the case. We have an overall budget that this year is about $21 million that includes both the Public Defender's Office and the Conflicts Counsel program. And then within that, we have line items for our salary, line items for outside services such as psychologists and psychiatrists, for supplies, for the rental space of our office in Sussex, for computers and for legal research engines. So we have, like any agency, we have a budget with various line items, but we don't break it down by case. So there's no like fixed amount for any particular case. We have to manage the caseload with the resources we have, and I can tell you that while the state has an interest or has been trying to downsize, over the last several years our budget has increased slightly, as has our caseload. And so far, the Office of Management and Budget and the Joint Finance Committee, they understand that if we're going to be prosecuting people, and many of them cannot afford to hire lawyers of their own, the state is constitutionally obligated to provide the resources to provide adequate defense counsel for them. And, you know, it's not just a lawyer. We have a lawyer who's supported by a secretarial staff and investigative staff and psychoforensic evaluators, and in the case of capital murder cases, mitigation specialists. So it doesn't really break down in a way I could explain to you how much it costs per case.
What about this? What about the other one where has anybody plea bargained that was innocent? And they had to take a plea bargain that was innocent that you're aware of?
Yeah, good question. And I have to say, yeah, the answer is yes, but that was that person's decision.
Right.
You know, a few minutes ago when Norman and I were talking, I mentioned that, you know, in many circumstances, a get-out-of-jail plea looks very attractive. And I know, in my mind anyway, that some people who claim to be innocent take that deal because they can get out. And many people give up their rights even though they claim to be innocent.
Yeah, but that's a chance. They don't want to take that chance.
That's a judgment that they make.
Yeah.
And Julian, I
That's
can
a
tell
good
you
question.
many people do that, but nobody is forced to take that deal.
Hey, thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
That's a good question. How you doing? Welcome to the show.
Hey, good evening. I'm so glad you have this guest on tonight. I got a couple of questions.
Sure.
Well, first of all, mandatory sentencing. In 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court declared that mandatory sentencing was unconstitutional. But we know that many of our judges are using those mandatory guidelines to put people in jail. And about the plea bargains, there is a movie out now called Snitch. And it's about how the public defenders, mostly the U.S. attorneys, are threatening the clients, and sometimes with little or no evidence, that if you don't take the plea, you're going to get a higher sentence if you make us take you to trial, and then you lose. So I want to know what does your guest here think about mandatory sentencing? Because I've talked to several of the judges. A few years ago, we were talking about drug courts, using drug courts for people with drug abuse, treating drug abuse as a medical condition, because we're filling our prisons at $36,000 a year when drug treatment is $3,000. So it doesn't make any economic sense to put drug abusers in prison, whether they're going to come out still still abusing drugs, and there's little or no rehabilitation going on in the prisons. And the other question is about solitary confinement. Solitary confinement is an inhumane condition according to the International Court. I'd like to know what you think about that, too.
Hey, thank you. Hey, very good questions.
Thank you. Well, my position on minimum mandatory sentences is that they do very little good and they cause a lot of harm. The fact is, we appoint judges after years of experience that have proven they've been very good lawyers, they've been pillars of the legal community, and we put them on the bench because they have judgment sufficient for us to call them judges. We rely on their judgment. And putting a mandatory sentences into play takes that judgment away from the lawyers and really puts the judgment in the hands of a young prosecutor with much less experience, much less balance, who's in the throes of an adversary process. A judge who's neutral has much better perspective about what a sentence ought to be than a prosecutor has. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have judges do the sentencing. One of the impacts of the minimum mandatory sentences, it takes the ball out of the judge's hands, which is not a good thing.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, I'm opposed, but also, we make these rules like minimum mandatory sentence, and as it turns out, the lesson we always forget is that one size rarely fits every circumstance.
Right.
One size rarely fits every circumstance. So what we have is, in many times, a person who seems to be eligible for a minimum mandatory sentence, but when you look at what ought to happen to that person, something much less ought to happen to him. A sentence much shorter than the minimum mandatory sentence.
Sure.
But the judge's hands are tied.
How you doing? Welcome to the show.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, hi. I have one question for your guest.
Uh-huh.
Of the 75 attorneys that's in the cadre of attorneys, how many are black?
About 7 or 8.
7 or 8?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Very good system. So the reality is, technologically, in terms of generating data and running reports to prove or disprove certain things, my view is our technology is superior to the Attorney General's. So I don't feel we're at any disadvantage in terms of the technology we have versus the technology the prosecutors have. In terms of rendering an opinion for you, Pastor D, on whether or not your previous record could prohibit you from running for mayor, we really can't do that by law. Our practice is limited to one thing, and that is defending people who are charged with crimes. If people don't have money to hire a lawyer and they're charged with crimes, we defend them. That's all we do. We don't defend people in custody battles. We don't defend them in child support. We don't defend them in any kind of civil stuff.